My parents charged me market rent to teach responsibility, while secretly funding my brother's lavish lifestyle with my money. When they tried evicting me to turn my room into his studio, I utilized the strict lease they forced on me. They never noticed the one devastating clause I added that would cost them everything. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss the trap I set. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The migraine had started somewhere between the third deposition of the day and the moment I missed my bus home. It was a throbbing, relentless pressure behind my left eye, a physical manifestation of the exhaustion that had become my constant companion over the last 3 years. By the time I unlocked the front door of my parents' house, a house I paid $2,000 a month to live in, I was physically shaking. I just wanted to dissolve into my mattress, close my eyes, and pretend that my bank account wasn't bleeding out just to keep a roof over my head in the suburbs. I stepped into the foyer, dropping my heavy tote bag on the floor. The house smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, a warm, inviting scent that usually signaled a family dinner. My stomach growled, a reminder that I had skipped lunch to finish a subpoena summary for the senior partner. "I'm home," I called out, my voice raspy. "Sorry I'm late, the bus loop was a nightmare." There was no answer. The silence that followed wasn't the empty kind. It was heavy, pregnant with whispered conversations that had abruptly stopped the moment the lock tumbled. I walked into the kitchen. They were all there. My mother, Alexandra, was seated at the head of the table, her hands clasped tightly around a mug of tea, her lips pursed in that thin, disapproving line I knew so well. My father, Andrew, wouldn't look at me. He was intently studying a spot on the tablecloth, his jaw set in a rigid clench. And then there was Miles. Miles, my 24-year-old brother, was leaning back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked rested, vibrant, and utterly unburdened, the exact opposite of me. He was wearing a brand new designer hoodie that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Claire," Alexandra said, "it wasn't a greeting, it was a summons. Sit down, we need to have a family meeting." I felt a cold prickle of dread run down my spine. "Can I just get some water first? I've been on my feet since 7. "Sit," Andrew barked, finally looking up. His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth a father should have for a daughter who had just worked a 12-hour shift. I pulled out the wooden chair opposite Miles. He winked at me, actually winked. "What's going on?" I asked, looking between them. "Is someone sick?" Alexandra took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her silk blouse. "Your father and I have been discussing the living arrangements. We feel that things need to evolve." "Evolve?" I asked, confusion clouding my tired brain. "I paid the rent on the 1st, just like always. The transfer went through. I have the receipt." "This isn't about the rent, Claire," Andrew said, waving his hand dismissively. "This is about the future. Miles has a new venture, a very promising business opportunity." I looked at Miles. He grilled cheese sandwiches for a living, or rather, he tried to. He had spent the last 6 months trying to launch a gourmet toast, TikTok channel that had fewer views than I had legal briefs in my briefcase. "Okay," I said slowly. "Good for Miles. What does that have to do with me?" Alexandra slid a single sheet of paper across the polished oak table. It wasn't a lease renewal. It was a formal notice. "Notice to vacate." "Miles needs space for his production studio," Alexandra stated, as if she were commenting on the weather. "His equipment is sensitive. He needs a controlled environment. Your room has the best natural light in the house, and it's the furthest from the street noise. We need you to move out by the end of the month." I stared at the paper. The words swam before my eyes. "You're kicking me out for a TikTok studio." "It's a media enterprise, Claire," Miles corrected, his voice dripping with condescension. "You wouldn't understand the logistics." "We've given you plenty of time to get on your feet," Andrew added, his tone taking on that familiar, lecturing cadence. "You've been here 3 years. It's time you faced the real world without us holding your hand. You need to learn independence. Independence? The word hung in the air like a bad joke. I paid market rent. I bought my own groceries. I paid for my own utilities, my own insurance, my own phone bill. I essentially ran this household's legal administration for free. I pay $2,000 a month, I whispered, my voice trembling. That is the real world, Dad. Where do you think I'm going to go in this market with 2 weeks' notice? That's not our problem, Alexandra said, standing up to signal the end of the discussion. We've supported you long enough. It's Miles's turn to shine. We need to prioritize his potential. She turned to the counter and picked up a stack of mail. Oh, and this came for you. Looks like a bank statement. She tossed it onto the table. It slid across and hit my hand. It wasn't my statement. It was a joint account statement, one my parents shared. It must have been mixed in with my mail by mistake. The envelope was already open. My eyes fell on the transaction list visible through the window. Transfer from Claire Rent, plus $2,000 transfer out to Miles auto loan. Transfer out to Miles credit card payoff, $150,000. The world stopped. The buzzing in my head silenced, replaced by a roaring clarity. They weren't saving my rent money. They weren't using it for the mortgage. Every single month, for 3 years, they had taken my hard-earned money I slaved over legal contracts to earn, and funneled it directly into Miles's pockets. I was paying for the hoodie he was wearing. I was paying for the car he drove. I looked up at them. Alexandra was already turning away to check the oven. Andrew was patting Miles on the shoulder. They looked so righteous, so justified. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It was a systemic, calculated theft of my life to fuel his. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. That's what they expected. They expected the emotional, irrational daughter who would cry and beg and give them the satisfaction of being the rational adults. Instead, I stood up. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to hold me. I picked up the eviction notice and the bank statement. I see, I said. My voice was frighteningly calm. It sounded like the voice I used when I had to tell a client that their case was going to trial. So, to clarify, you are terminating my tenancy effective immediately to facilitate Miles's hobby. Don't belittle him, Alexandra snapped, spinning around, a spatula in hand. He has dreams, Claire, something you used to have before you settled for being a glorified secretary. The insult landed, but I didn't flinch. And the rent I've been paying, that was strictly for household expenses, correct? Andrew narrowed his eyes. Why are you interrogating us? We own this house. We make the rules. You're lucky we let you stay this long. Most parents would have kicked you out at 18. Right, I said. Lucky. I walked out of the kitchen. I could hear Miles snickering as I left. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, sis, he called. I climbed the stairs to my room, the room that was apparently destined to become a content creation hub. I closed the door and locked it. Then, I collapsed onto the floor. The tears came then, hot and stinging. I wrapped my arms around my knees and rocked back and forth. It wasn't just the money. It was the value. They valued his potential failure more than my actual success. I was the reliable one, the safety net, the bank. Miles was the investment. I looked around the room. I had painted these walls. I had installed the shelving unit myself. I had replaced the carpet when I moved back in because Andrew claimed the old one was fine despite the mold. I grabbed my laptop and sat on the bed. I needed to see it. I needed to see the document that had started this entire nightmare 3 years ago. When I first moved back in after law school, well, after I had to drop out of law school due to funding, Andrew had insisted on a lease. If you live here, you live as a tenant, he had said, slamming a thick document on the table. No handouts. We're teaching you how the real world works. You sign a lease, you pay a deposit, you abide by the terms. Breach it and you're out. He had downloaded a template from a landlord forum, a shark lease designed to protect the landlord from everything. It was draconic. It forbade guests after 10 p.m. It mandated quiet hours. It put all maintenance costs on the tenant. I opened my cloud drive and found the file. Lease agreement Claire final signed, PDF. I scrolled through the pages. My eyes scanned the clauses. I remembered the day I signed it. I remembered Andrew standing over me, pen in hand, demanding I sign it immediately without reading because I'm your father, don't you trust me? But I was a paralegal. I never signed anything without reading it. And more importantly, I never signed anything without correcting it. I had taken the file he sent me via email to print out, and I had made edits. Subtle edits. And then I had printed it, signed it, and handed it to him. In his arrogance, in his absolute certainty that he held all the power and that I was just his submissive daughter, he had signed it without double-checking the text. I stopped scrolling at page 14, clause 22, terms of termination and tenancy D. Uration. A slow, cold smile spread across my face, drying the tears on my cheeks. They thought they were kicking out a daughter. They thought they were bullying a child who had nowhere to go. They had forgotten one crucial thing: they weren't dealing with their daughter anymore. They were dealing with a tenant with a binding legal contract that they had signed, notarized, and filed. And in their haste to exploit me, they had forgotten to read the fine print I had inserted. A fine print that turned their teaching moment into a legal bear trap. To understand why this betrayal cut so deep, you have to understand the history of the Bank of Clare. I have been the responsible one since I was 12. When Alexandra forgot to pay the electricity bill because she was too busy shopping for Miles's soccer gear, I was the one who called the company and pretended to be her to get an extension. When Andrew needed help formatting his resumes because he couldn't figure out Microsoft Word, I spent my weekends doing it for him. I worked 3 jobs in undergrad. I didn't party. I didn't go on spring break. I saved every penny to go to law school. But when the acceptance letter came, so did the family crisis. Miles had gotten into trouble, some vandalism charge that required a very good lawyer and a very large settlement to keep off his record. "We need the money, Claire," Alexandra had cried, sitting on the edge of my bed. "It's your brother's future. You can go to law school next year. The family needs you." So I gave them my tuition savings, all of it, $30,000, gone. I took the job as a paralegal instead, telling myself I'd save up again. I moved back home to accelerate the savings. That's when the rent started. "It's only fair," Andrew had argued. "You're a working professional now, you should pay your way." I agreed. I thought the $2,000 was high for a single room in the suburbs, but I thought, it's my parents. It helps them. Now I knew where the help was going. I opened my bedroom door to go to the bathroom and almost collided with Miles. He was standing in the hallway, holding a tape measure. He was literally measuring the doorframe of my room while I was still inside it. "Hey," he said, not even looking me in the eye. "Do you think this frame can support a soundproofing curtain, or should I just drywall over it?" He was wearing that same smirk. He had the kind of face that had never known a punch, smooth and pampered. He had dropped out of 3 different colleges. First, it was business, but the professors were too old school. Then it was graphic design, but he didn't like the deadlines. Then it was philosophy, which lasted 2 weeks. Through it all, he drove a leased Audi. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic until the transmission died, and then I took the bus. "You're measuring my room, Miles," I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "My studio," he corrected. He looked me up and down, his eyes landing on my worn-out work slacks. "Look, Claire, don't make this hard. Mom and Dad are stressed enough. Just pack your stuff and go. You can probably find a basement suite somewhere. You're good at scraping by." He tapped the tape measure against his palm. "I'm going to be huge, you know. This channel is going to blow up. I need this space. I need the feng shui to be right. Your energy in here is just stagnant." "Stagnant," I repeated. "Yeah, depressing. Working 9 to 5, pushing paper. It's sad, honestly. Mom says she worries you're going to end up a spinster with nothing to show for your life but a 401k. He laughed, a short, cruel sound. I need the room by the first, Claire. I have a collab scheduled. He turned and walked away, whistling. He walked with the swagger of a man who had never paid a bill in his life. He walked like he owned the place. Technically, my parents owned the place. But as I watched him go, I thought about the document sitting open on my laptop. I thought about the security deposit I had paid. I thought about the local tenant laws I memorized for work. They saw me as a resource to be harvested and discarded. They saw Miles as a king to be served. Alexandra walked out of her bedroom then, spotting me in the hall. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't apologize for the eviction. Claire, she said sharply, since you're up, the dishwasher needs emptying, and Miles left his dinner plate in the living room. Pick it up before the sauce stains the rug. She looked at me with total expectation. The servant was being dismissed, but the servant still had chores to do before she left. I'm not doing the dishes, Mom, I said quietly. She froze. Excuse me. I'm not doing the dishes, and I'm not picking up Miles's plate. I'm going to bed. You live under my roof. For now, I cut her off. Good night. I shut the door in her face. I heard her scoff, heard her muttering to Andrew about my attitude. I went back to my desk. I pulled out a fresh legal pad. It was time to stop being the daughter. It was time to start being the plaintiff. I picked up my pen. I didn't write a diary entry. I wrote a header. Strategic plan, lease enforcement, and asset recovery. They wanted the real world. I was about to give them a crash course. The next morning, the house was silent. I woke up at 5:00 a.m., an hour earlier than usual, driven by a restless energy that felt less like caffeine and more like adrenaline. I showered in the dark, dressed in my sharpest charcoal suit, the one I wore for high-stakes mediation, and packed my laptop. I didn't pack a single box of my personal belongings. Instead, I packed evidence. I made coffee, the noise of the grinder sounding like a declaration of war in the quiet kitchen. As I waited for the brew, I surveyed the room. This was the kitchen where I had learned to bake, the table where I had done my homework. It was also the crime scene where my financial future was being bled dry. I left before anyone woke up. I couldn't stomach the sight of Miles's smug face or my mother's dismissive back just yet. I needed the armor of my office. When I arrived at the firm, the bullpen was empty. I sat at my desk, the hum of the server room the only sound. I opened the lease agreement Claire final signed, PDF again. I needed to be absolutely certain. I needed to make sure my memory wasn't rewriting history to protect my feelings. I scrolled to page 14. There it was. Clause 22(b), guaranteed tenancy duration and early termination penalty. It is mutually agreed that this tenancy is for a fixed term of 60 months, 5 years, to ensure housing stability for the tenant. The landlord waives the right to terminate this agreement early for any reason other than non-payment of rent or destruction of property. Should the landlord attempt to terminate this agreement without cause prior to the expiration date, the landlord agrees to pay a liquidated damages fee equal to the remaining balance of the lease term, or a flat fee of $50,000, whichever is greater, plus all legal fees and relocation costs incurred by the tenant. I traced the signature at the bottom, Andrew J., a chaotic, sprawling scrawl, and next to it Alexandra M., a tight, neat cursive. They had signed it 3 years ago. They had been so eager to lock me into paying their mortgage, so eager to make sure I couldn't just leave if I found a boyfriend or a better apartment, that they hadn't noticed the duration. They thought they were trapping me. They thought they were guaranteeing themselves 5 years of income. They never imagined they would want to kick me out for a TikTok studio. I printed 3 copies. Then I drafted a formal letter, not a Dear Mom and Dad letter, a To the Landlords of Address letter. Ray, invalid notice to vacate and breach of contract. I typed furiously, my fingers flying across the keys. I cited the specific state codes regarding fixed-term leases. I referenced the quiet enjoyment clause they were violating by harassing me about moving. I attached the bank statement showing the misappropriation of funds, not that it was illegal for them to spend their income how they wanted, but it painted a picture of bad faith. I didn't stop there. I needed more leverage. If they were willing to kick me out, they were willing to fight dirty. I logged into the county property records database, a standard tool I used for real estate cases. I pulled the deed to the house. Then I pulled the lien history. My breath hitched. There wasn't just a primary mortgage. There was a HELOC home equity line of credit taken out 2 years ago for $150,000. I did the math. 2 years ago. That was right around the time Miles launched his dropshipping business that failed in 3 months. That was around the time he bought the new camera gear, the time he went on that networking trip to Dubai. They had leveraged the equity of the family home to fund him, and the interest rates on HELOCs were variable. They were likely drowning in payments. That's why they needed my rent, and that's why they were desperate for Miles to succeed. They were betting the house on it. Literally. I felt a wave of nausea. They were financially ruining themselves for him and using me as the life raft to keep their heads above water just long enough to drown. I printed the property records. I printed the lease. I put everything into a crisp, manila envelope stamped with the law firm's logo. I was allowed to use company letterhead for personal legal matters if approved by a partner, and my boss, a shark named Sarah who hated deadbeat parents, had given me the green light when I briefed her over coffee at 8:00 a.m. "Bury them, Claire," Sarah had said, taking a sip of her espresso. "And if they give you trouble, put my name on the next letter." I went home at 6:00 p.m. I walked in the door. The house was chaotic. Miles had moved my living room furniture, the couch I bought, into the hallway. "Hey," he shouted from the living room. "I need this space clear for a wide shot. Move your junk." My mother was in the kitchen, packing boxes, my boxes. She had gone into my room. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Alexandra looked up, holding a stack of my law books. "Helping you pack. Since you're dragging your feet, we need the room clear by Friday, Claire. Miles has a sponsor lined up." "Put the books down," I said. "Don't take that tone with me," she snapped. "You're being selfish. We're doing this for the family." "No," I said, unzipping my bag. "You're doing this for Miles, and you're doing it illegally." I pulled out the manila envelope. I didn't hand it to her. I slammed it onto the kitchen counter. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "What is this?" Andrew asked, walking in from the garage, wiping grease from his hands. "That," I said, standing tall, "is my response to your eviction notice. I suggest you read it. Carefully. Because unlike you, I read everything before I sign it." Andrew wiped his hands on a rag and walked over to the counter. He looked at the envelope with a mix of confusion and irritation, as if it were a piece of junk mail I had left out. "We don't have time for your games, Claire," he grumbled. "Miles is waiting on." "Read it, Dad," I interrupted, my voice hard. "Now." Something in my tone, perhaps the lawyer voice I had spent 3 years perfecting, made him pause. He picked up the envelope and tore it open. Alexandra peered over his shoulder, her brow furrowed. I watched their faces. It was a slow transformation. First dismissal, then confusion, then the blood drained from Andrew's face. "What is this?" he whispered. "Clause 22, fixed term." 5 years, I said, leaning against the island, crossing my arms. "I have 2 years left on my lease. You cannot evict me without cause, and Miles needs a studio is not legal cause." "I never signed this," Alexandra spat, grabbing the paper from Andrew's hands. "This is fake. You forged this." "Look at the last page, Mom," I said calmly. "That's your signature. That's the notary stamp from the bank. Remember, you insisted we notarize it to make it official. To teach me a lesson about binding contracts." Andrew was reading the highlighted section, his lips moving silently. $50,000. he choked out. What? Alexandra shrieked. What 50,000? If you break the lease early, I explained, you owe me a liquidation fee. $50,000, plus my moving costs, plus my legal fees. This is ridiculous. Andrew threw the papers down. They scattered across the floor. You tricked us. You changed the document. I amended the document, I corrected. I sent you the file. I told you to review it. You chose not to because you were too busy lecturing me about responsibility to practice it yourself. I am your father, he roared, stepping forward. His face was red, a vein bulging in his neck. I own this house. I don't care what some piece of paper says. That piece of paper is a legally binding contract, I said, not flinching. If you try to move my things, if you change the locks, if you touch one more of my law books, I will sue you. And I will win. And given that you have a $150,000 HELOC hanging over your heads, I don't think you can afford to lose 50 grand to me. The room went dead silent. Alexandra looked at me with pure horror. How do you know about the loan? Public records, I said. I know you're drowning, Mom. I know you're using my rent to pay the interest on the debt you took out for Miles. And now you want to kick out your only source of reliable income. It's not for Miles, she lied, her voice shrill. It was for home improvements. Miles's car is a home improvement, I asked. His credit card debt, I saw the statements, Mom. Miles wandered into the kitchen then, holding a ring light. He looked at the scene, Andrew red-faced and shaking, Alexandra pale and trembling, papers covering the floor. Whoa, he laughed. What's the drama? Did Claire refuse to pack her ugly sweaters? Shut up, Miles, Andrew snapped. It was the first time in his life he had ever raised his voice at the golden child. Miles blinked, stunned. Whoa, chill out, I just need the room. You're not getting the room, I said, turning to him. I'm staying, and I'm keeping my furniture. Put my couch back. You can't talk to me like that, Miles sneered, stepping into my personal space. He was taller than me, used to physically intimidated people. This is my house, Dad said. Dad signed a contract, I said, looking him dead in the eye. And unless you have $50,000 in your pocket to buy me out, you're going to be filming your TikToks in the basement. Mom, Miles whined, turning to her. Do something, she's ruining everything. Alexandra looked at me. Her eyes were fill. Ed with a cold, venomous hate I had never seen before. It wasn't the annoyance of a parent. It was the hatred of a con artist who had been caught. You ungrateful little snake, she hissed. We clothed you, we fed you. And I paid you, I countered. Market rate, for 3 years, the transaction is complete. Now I suggest you put my books back on the shelf. I have work to do. I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I walked with the steady, rhythmic click of my heels on the hardwood, leaving them amidst the wreckage of their own greed. The victory was sweet but short-lived. I knew them. They wouldn't just roll over. They were embarrassed, exposed, and desperate. Desperate people make stupid mistakes. Over the next 3 days, the house became a war zone. They didn't speak to me. They spoke at me or about me loudly when I was in the room. It's a shame we have a squatter, Alexandra would say to the phone, supposedly talking to her sister but making sure I could hear. Someone who takes advantage of family. Then the petty tactics started. On Thursday, I came home to find the internet router missing. It broke, Andrew said, shrugging as he watched TV. We're not replacing it. Can't afford it. I smiled. That's fine, I have a hotspot. On Friday, the hot water heater was, mysteriously, turned off. I just went down to the basement and turned it back on, then installed a padlock on the utility room door. I had rights to utilities under the lease. But Saturday was when things escalated to a level I hadn't anticipated. I woke up to the sound of drilling. Loud, aggressive drilling right against my bedroom wall. I opened the door. Miles was in the hallway, drilling holes into the drywall, my bedroom wall from the outside. What are you doing? I shouted over the noise. Soundproofing the hallway, he yelled back, grinning. He wasn't soundproofing anything. He was just making noise. He was trying to construct a constructive eviction, making the living conditions so unbearable that I would leave voluntarily. I didn't engage. I took a video of him. I took a video of the dust covering the floor. I took a video of Andrew watching from the bottom of the stairs, smiling. Then, I went back into my room and called the city code enforcement. Yes, I told the officer on the phone. My landlord is performing unpermitted construction work during the weekend that is impacting the structural integrity of a rental unit. I believe there are also electrical violations in the new studio they are building in the basement. The inspector arrived 2 hours later. Andrew tried to stop him at the door, but I met him on the porch with my lease in hand. "I am the tenant," I said. "I grant you entry." The inspection was a massacre. Miles had tried to wire his studio in the basement himself to save money. Exposed wires, overloaded circuits, fire hazards everywhere. The inspector slapped an orange sticker on the breaker box and issued a citation. "This wiring is illegal," the inspector told Andrew, handing him a clipboard. "You have 48 hours to fix it with a licensed electrician, or we shut off power to the dwelling. And stop the drilling immediately. You don't have a permit." Andrew was purple with rage. As soon as the inspector left, he turned on me. "You called the city on your own family," he screamed. "Do you know how much an electrician costs?" "About as much as a month of my rent," I said coolly. "Maybe you should use the money you were going to spend on Miles's next vacation." "You are destroying this family," Alexandra cried, tears streaming down her face, fake, weaponized tears. "Why are you doing this?" "I am protecting my rights," I said. "You tried to throw me on the street. You tried to steal my home. I am just holding you to the standard you set. The real world, remember." That evening, I was in my room when I heard the front door slam. Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. It was Miles, but he wasn't alone. He had brought 2 of his friends, large, frat boy types who looked like they had been drinking. They pounded on my door. "Come on out, Claire," Miles shouted. "We're gonna help you move. Boys, grab her stuff." They kicked the door. The wood splintered near the jamb. Panic flared in my chest. This wasn't legal maneuvering anymore. This was physical intimidation. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. "I have intruders trying to break into my room," I whispered to the operator. "I am in fear for my safety." Then I started recording. "Open up," one of the friends yelled. "Don't be a bitch, just leave." "I have called the police," I shouted through the door. "They are on their way." The kicking stopped. I heard murmuring. "Dude, you didn't say she'd call the cops," one of the friends whispered. "I'm on probation, man. I'm out." "Wait, don't go," Miles pleaded. But the friends were already retreating. Miles was left alone in the hallway. I opened door just a crack, the chain still on. "You crossed the line, Miles," I said. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steel. "Attempted breaking and entering, harassment, I'm adding it to the file." When the police arrived, Andrew tried to smooth it over. "Just a family dispute, officer. Kids playing around." The officer looked at the splintered doorframe. He looked at my video. He looked at my terrified face. "Ma'am, do you want to press charges?" the officer asked me. I looked at Miles. He looked small now, scared. He was hiding behind Alexandra. "No," I said slowly. "Not yet, but I want a police report filed. I want a record of this event." I turned to my parents. "And I have one more thing for you." I went to my desk and pulled out a new document I had prepared that afternoon. It was the nuclear option. "This is a demand letter," I said, handing it to Andrew. "Since you have breached the covenant of quiet enjoyment, attempted an illegal self-help eviction, and allowed harassment by a third party, I am considering the lease terminated for cause by the tenant." Andrew looked hopeful for a second. "So you're leaving?" "Yes," I said, "but read the rest." He looked down. "Pursuant to the breach, the tenant demands the immediate return of all rent paid in the last 12 months as damages for the illegal conditions. plus the immediate payout of the $50,000 penalty clause for constructive eviction, plus the release of the security deposit. Total demand, $74,000, payable within 7 days, or I file the lawsuit and I report the unreported rental income to the IRS. Andrew dropped the paper. He looked at Alexandra. The IRS, Alexandra whispered. You never declared my rent as income, did you? I asked softly. I checked the tax transcripts you left on the counter last year. You claimed I was living here rent-free. That's tax fraud. And mortgage fraud since you didn't disclose the rental income to the bank for the HELOC. I stepped closer. So here is the deal, you pay me, or you go to prison, it's your choice. The deadline I gave them, 7 days, was set to expire on a Sunday. Coincidentally, or perhaps by some cruel twist of fate designed to maximize the drama, that Sunday was also the date of my Aunt Linda's 60th birthday party. Aunt Linda was the matriarch of the extended family, the keeper of secrets, and the judge of character. Her approval meant everything to my mother. The party was being held at a rented banquet hall, a lavish affair that I knew my parents could ill afford but felt compelled to attend to keep up appearances. I hadn't planned to go. I had planned to spend the day finalizing the lawsuit filing with Sarah. But on Saturday night, I received a text from Miles. Don't bother showing up tomorrow. Mom told everyone you're having a mental breakdown. If you come and make a scene, Dad says he'll call the cops on you for harassment. It was the final straw. They weren't just trying to steal my money, they were actively destroying my reputation to cover their tracks. They wanted to isolate me, to paint me as the unstable daughter so that when the lawsuit hit, the family would dismiss it as the ravings of a lunatic. I put on my best dress, a structured navy sheath that made me look every inch the legal professional I was. I did my hair. I applied my makeup with the precision of war paint. And I grabbed my evidence binder, a thick black folder containing the lease, the bank statements, the police report, and the unfinished tax fraud whistleblowing form. I arrived at the banquet hall an hour late. The party was in full swing. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter floated through the air, and a jazz quartet played softly in the corner. I spotted my parents and Miles at the main table near Aunt Linda. They looked the picture of the perfect family. Miles was charming a cousin, likely pitching some investment scam. Alexandra was laughing a little too loudly, clutching a glass of champagne. Andrew looked pale, his eyes darting around the room nervously. When I walked in, the room didn't go silent, but the temperature at the main table dropped 20 degrees. Alexandra spotted me first. Her smile froze, then shattered. She whispered something to Andrew, who stood up abruptly, knocking his napkin to the floor. I didn't walk to them, I walked straight to Aunt Linda. Happy birthday, Auntie, I said, handing her a small, tasteful gift bag. Claire, Linda beamed, pulling me into a hug. Your mother said you weren't well. She said you were having episodes. I'm perfectly fine, Auntie, I said, my voice clear enough to carry to the nearby tables. I've just been dealing with some difficult legal matters involving a landlord dispute. Alexandra materialized at my elbow, her grip on my arm like a vice. Claire, she hissed, her voice a rictus of forced cheer. We didn't think you'd make it. Let's go outside and talk. I don't want to talk outside, Mom, I said, pulling my arm free. I think. We're done talking in shadows. Don't do this, Andrew warned, stepping up behind her. Not here. Do what? I asked innocently. I'm just wishing my aunt a happy birthday, unless, is there something you're afraid I'll say? Miles sauntered over, a half-eaten shrimp cocktail in his hand. He looked bored, arrogant. She's just trying to get attention. Ignore her. She's jealous because I just secured a major brand deal. Is that the brand deal that costs $50,000? I asked. Or is that just the price of your silence? Shut up, Miles snapped, his facade cracking. No, I said, turning to face them fully. The music seemed to fade into the background. People were watching now. I gave you a deadline. It expires at midnight. Have you transferred the funds? We don't have that kind of money, and you know it, Andrew whispered furiously. You're bleeding us dry." "I'm bleeding you dry?" I laughed, a cold, sharp sound. I opened the black binder. "Shall we review the accounting?" I pulled out the highlighted bank statement. I held it up. $2,000 a month for 3 years. That's $72,000 of my income. And where did it go? Did it go to the mortgage? Did it go to groceries? I pointed at Miles. It went to him. "Claire, stop," Alexandra pleaded, looking around at the staring relatives. "Please." "It went to his car payments," I continued, my voice rising with the tide of 3 years of suppressed rage. "It went to his credit card debt. It went to his business ventures that never made a dime. You made me pay rent to live in my childhood home so you could subsidize a 24-year-old man who refuses to work." "That's a lie," Miles shouted. "I work harder than you, you're just a paper pusher." "I am a paralegal," I corrected him. "And do you know what paralegals are good at? Documentation." I pulled out the next sheet, the police report. "This is the report from yesterday," I told the gathered crowd, who were now openly listening. Aunt Linda looked horrified. "When Miles and his friends tried to break down my bedroom door because I refused to be illegally evicted." "Evicted?" Aunt Linda gasped. "Alexandra, you're evicting Claire." "She's toxic," Alexandra cried, her defense crumbling into hysteria. "She's trying to ruin us. She added clauses to a lease." "A lease you forced me to sign," I countered. "You wanted to play landlord, Mom. Well, congratulations, you're a landlord and you broke the law." I turned to Andrew. He looked defeated, a man whose house of cards had finally collapsed. "I have the IRS whistleblower form right here," I said, holding up the final document. "It's filled out. All I have to do is mail it. If I do, they will audit you for the last 3 years of unreported rental income. They will look at the HELOC application where you claimed you had no dependents living at home. They will find the fraud." The word fraud hung in the air like smoke. "You have until tomorrow morning," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that screamed louder than a shout. "Liquidate the assets. Sell the car. I don't care. Put the money in my account or I mail this. And I sue." I closed the binder with a snap. "Happy birthday, Aunt Linda," I said politely. I turned and walked out. Behind me, I heard the sound of a glass shattering, perhaps dropped by my mother or perhaps thrown. It didn't matter. The silence that followed was the sound of their reputation dying. The drive home was silent, but my mind was loud. I didn't go back to the house. I checked into a hotel, a nice one downtown. I put the cost on my credit card, knowing I would be reimbursed. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the city lights, wondering if I had gone too far. Family is supposed to be forever. But then I remembered the drilling. I remembered the smirk on Miles's face as he measured my room. I remembered the sheer entitlement. At 9:00 a.m. on Monday, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. Wire transfer received, $74,000. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. They had done it. I didn't know how. Maybe they raided their retirement, maybe they maxed out another card, or maybe they finally forced Miles to sell his precious Audi. But the money was there. An hour later, I got a text from Andrew. "Money sent, we are done. Come get your things." I hired professional movers. I wasn't going to carry a single box myself. I went to the house one last time to supervise. The atmosphere was funereal. The house was quiet. The studio equipment was gone from the living room. I found Andrew in the garage. He was sitting on a folding chair, staring at the empty space where Miles's car used to be. "You sold it?" I asked, standing in the doorway. He looked up. He looked 10 years older. "We had to. CarMax took it this morning. We sold the boat too." "I'm sorry it came to this, Dad," I said, and I meant it, "but you gave me no choice." "We just wanted to help him," Andrew said, his voice cracking. He's not like you, Claire. He's not strong. We thought if we gave him a head start." "You weren't giving him a head start," I said gently. "You were crippling him, and you were cannibalizing me to do it." Andrew nodded slowly. He looked down at his hands. Your mother is, she's taking it hard, but Linda called her this morning, gave her an earful. I think we lost sight of things. He stood up and walked over to me. He didn't hug me, that bridge was burned for now, but he extended a hand. You're a hell of a lawyer, Claire, he said, a sad smile touching his lips. I guess we did teach you something about the real world after all. I shook his hand. Paralegal, I corrected, but I'm working on the lawyer part. Good luck, he said. I walked out to the driveway. The movers were closing the truck. Miles was sitting on the front steps, his head in his hands. He looked up as I passed. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a scared kid who had just realized the safety net was gone. What am I supposed to do now? He asked, his voice trembling. They're making me pay rent. I stopped. I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. Get a job, Miles, I said, and read your employment contract before you sign it. I got into my car and drove away. 3 months later, I closed on my own place. It was a 2-bedroom condo in the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the skyline. It was mine. The deed had one name on it, Claire. I used the settlement money for the down payment and to finally pay my tuition for law school. I was going back in the fall. My relationship with my parents is evolving. We text occasionally. They are downsizing to a smaller apartment. The house is on the market. Miles is working at a warehouse, hating every minute of it, but finally paying his own way. It wasn't the happy ending I had imagined as a child. There were scars. But as I sat on my balcony, drinking coffee from a mug that I bought, in a home that I owned, I realized that peace wasn't about having a perfect family. It was about having the self-respect to demand what you are worth. They wanted to teach me a lesson about contracts. Well, lesson learned. Always read the fine print, and never, ever underestimate the person who keeps the receipts.